Hello, and welcome to the So You Want to Be a Marine Biologist podcast, where we learn about the ocean, share sea stories, and explore ocean careers. I'm your host, Kara Muzia. Let's dive into today's episode. This episode is brought to you by you. Thank you to those of you who have become patrons of the So You Want to Be a Marine Biologist podcast. For less than the cost of a dive tank refill, or a cup of coffee, you can help keep the podcast episodes coming. There's also some fun bonuses for patrons, so be sure to check those out at patreon.com/marinebiolife. That's patreon.com/marinebiolife. Hello, mermaids, pirates, ocean lovers, and land lubbers. Welcome to today's show. What's the most musical part of the fish? The scales. What do seals say when they get stuck in seaweed? Kelp! My guest today is Dr. Deborah Brosnan. She is the founder of Deborah Brosnan and Associates, a firm dedicated to finding smart solutions for environmental risks. Growing up in coastal Ireland, Dr. Brosnan knew she wanted to be a marine biologist from a young age, wading around in tidal pools. In today's episode, she shares what coastal sustainability looks like and why living shorelines are some of the best defenses we have against climate change. We also chat about why Dr. Brosnan pursued higher degrees, and she shares what it's like being caught unawares diving while a volcano erupts overhead. Dr. Brosnan also shares how everyone can get involved in helping to make our oceans and communities more resilient. Please enjoy. Dr. Deborah Brosnan, welcome to the So You Want to Be a Marine Biologist podcast. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
Cara, thank you so much for having me on with you. I'm really excited to be speaking with you, and just wanted to thank you first off for the work that you're doing to reach out and encourage future generations of marine biologists. It's super. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. So I want to take your story back to the beginning for a minute. You grew up in a town called Limerick, Ireland. And I'm not going to lie, the first time when I read that, I was like, is there a limerick about Limerick?
I'm sure there is, Cara, and I'm pretty sure that I can't repeat it here.
Fair enough.
Limerick is the oldest city in Ireland. It was founded by the Vikings, and it was founded on the estuary of the River Shannon. So I grew up very close to the ocean, and we would spend all of our summers down on the coast of Ireland, the west coast of Ireland, in County Clare. So I literally grew up in the sea.
That's wonderful. And is that what inspired you to pursue your degrees in marine biology? Or was there like a particular experience during one of these trips to the ocean?
No, it was growing up so close to the ocean and literally being able to get up every morning and go down on the coast. We had a beach, we had a rocky shore near us, and just go and explore the rocky shore, which I did from probably about age 4. And that really got me interested in just how extraordinary the ocean was. I think it kept me out of trouble because there was so much to do in the sea. I just wanted to be there all the time. And then watching TV programs, there was Cousteau and there were various TV programs in the winter. And putting those two together, I really from age 10 knew I wanted to be a marine biologist. It was a passion and I was determined to do it. And at that time, the word marine biologist didn't really exist in Ireland. So I just heard it and I decided that was it. And then I had to figure out what that meant.
I love it. On your rocky coastline, was there something in particular that kind of caught your eye? Some of the algae that washes up or the critters, or just kind of being around the ocean just brought that natural curiosity out?
I think several things. One, the tide pools, just being in the tide pool, going and sometimes we would collect these little snails called periwinkles, which we took home and ate. So harvesting there, just watching the way that small fish used to hide out in these seaweeds and trying to catch them and figuring out that they were smarter than us in the pools. And then just being able to go in the ocean and when you've got a little mask on, you can open your eyes and see things that you don't see on land. So I was the whole gestalt of being there, just everything.
That's amazing. Now, when you were in university, you went to Galway for university and studied marine biology. What were some of the things that you studied there? Were you able to get out in the field more?
Yeah, a lot of the program in Galway was very much a hands-on program. So we would do these, week-long field trips to study algae along the Irish coast or to study marine life on the Irish coast. And then I did some interns at the Shellfish Research Lab, which is when aquaculture in Ireland was really just beginning. And the whole question was, well, how are we going to do this? How do we grow shellfish? How do we grow, um, fish like salmon? And how do we do it sustainably? So it was really at the beginning of those questions. So I had an incredible exposure to so many facets of biology, geology, botany, aquaculture, but all related to the ocean.
That's really wonderful. And at the end of it, did you go straight into your PhD, or did you take some time and kind of learn a little bit more about the field?
No, I always joke I took the scenic route in my career. And I think that's really important for people. If you don't necessarily follow the step one, step two, step three, four in linear, it's just fine. You can explore so many different aspects of it, try different areas and come back. So I did my undergraduate and master's in Ireland. Then I moved to the US and started working for NOAA when I was there, which is a National Oceanographic organization, and spent 3 years doing that. Then was back in England for a couple of years and then came to the US to do my PhD. I really wanted to come to the US because it has such an incredible program. And I worked with Bruce Mengi and Jane Lubchenko over in Oregon. And the reason I wanted to come to the States was because I realized that in the US, the PhD program really trains you as a professional scientist. It forces you to take courses, it forces you to present and not just do research. And at that time, most of the PhD programs in Europe were very focused on research. And I had done a lot of that. And what was missing was this additional part of the training, which I feel I got in the States. And then I never left.
Fell in love with the US, huh?
I really did. It offers so many amazing opportunities for people. You can follow your interests, you can follow your passion if you're willing to show up and work hard. There are opportunities there. And I certainly think that's true in the field of marine science, in the field of marine biology, and just the field of ocean conservation. There's so many opportunities and such great interest and an incredible number of people to talk to.
It really is. So you had two huge, amazing life experiences that seem like they really pivoted your life into where you are today. And those are diving under an erupting volcano and a plane crash. Could you kind of elaborate a little bit more on those stories?
So the volcano experience, we were actually out in the Caribbean on the island of Montserrat and looking at the coral reefs around the island with a view to setting up a marine reserve and trying to figure out which areas were most important to fisheries, which were most important to recruitment, which were most important to tourism, and trying to figure out how we would zone, if you like, that area. And we were diving on one of the reefs. We had set up some permanent monitoring sites. And we were on our second dive. And I remembered it was such an extraordinarily beautiful day. I was there with my camera at 1 in the afternoon photographing the reefs. And all of a sudden I heard this sound, which I thought was a boat going by, but it wasn't. And the volcano erupted. And it's like an andesite volcano. It's like Mount St. Helens in the US. It is an ash volcano. So literally the ash it was an extraordinary explosion. It took out the main town, which fortunately was evacuated. Literally, it looks like Pompeii, covered it in about 1,000 feet of ash. But that ash also came into the water. And we were under the water when it came down. So we were, I think, very fortunate to survive and be alive. But literally, I was under there. And I thought my camera was malfunctioning because it was going dark. And then I looked up and literally everything turned completely black. And so I had two of my team with me and I wrote on a slate, I think there's been an eruption. They had figured it out before me. I was on the camera saying, hello, I think this camera's broken. But then I said, stay there, I'm going to go and look. But they came up and we came up and this volcano, like this ash was covering everything. So being scientists, I said, we should put out our sediment traps. I think we'll get information. So we went back down. We put out our sediment traps, and then luckily, we had been there so often, we knew where the boat was. So we went back to the boat, got on the boat. By then, we probably had about 4 inches of ash on it, and we started the engines. We had one cut out, and we just traveled. It was going east to west, and we traveled north until we got out of the ash. And it took us about, I'd say, about 4 hours before it really was safe to come in and before we could come back in. But, we were fortunate. Most people were fortunate. There was some loss of life of about 20 people, which is really tragic, including people we knew, and really,
Mm-hmm.
very, really, very sad, who'd been in the
Mm-hmm.
evacuation zone. But then we talked with the volcanologists, and they said, look, we think you've got a window of opportunity. You can go back if you want to retrieve the sediment traps. And so 2 days later, we went back out and picked up the sediment traps, which told us how much ash had dropped on the corals. But what was one of the most extraordinary things to see was, these round corals. So some corals are round, they're shaped like heads or brain corals, and others are shaped like trees, and the tree corals tend to grow very quickly, whereas the round corals tend to
Mm-hmm.
grow slowly, and that's in general. And what we saw was that the tree corals got covered in ash, but they couldn't clean the ash off themselves. Whereas the round corals, they just wafted it and it just sort of fell off. And
Mm.
so these slow growing corals actually did much better in this heavy sediment. I mean, in this case, it's volcanic ash, so that's a little extreme. But they were doing much better in those sort of conditions than these branching corals. So, it really gave you an idea that there's a trade-off between being able to grow quickly and get all the sunlight and being able to handle these other conditions, which is why I think we've got one of the reasons we have such great biodiversity on reefs, that these conditions come and go. But we learned so much in that experience. It was and felt very fortunate to survive it. Obviously, yeah,
Hey, Kara here. I hear it all the time. How do I become a marine biologist? Or my niece wants to help the ocean. Where does she even start? I hear from students, yes, and also nurses, HR professionals, and other mid career folks who wonder if they could still make their dream of working with sea turtles or sharks come true, wondering if it's too late to answer the ocean's call. Here's what I've learned after 20 years in the field and hundreds of interviews. There's no straight line, no magic degree, and no gatekeeper. You create the path forward. If this sounds overwhelming and vague, I've created 2 tools to help you stop wondering what if and start moving forward with clarity and purpose. The first is my free guide, Be a Marine Biologist Without the Degree. Over 1,000 people have already downloaded this guide and taken their first step towards ocean impact. Inside, you'll find 7 concrete, doable actions to help you get started, whether you're just exploring or ready to make a change. Then there's the Ocean Blueprint. This is a 30-day self-paced course that helps you build your unique path into ocean science and conservation without quitting your job or going back to school. Inside the Ocean Blueprint, you'll get daily prompts to explore your interests, skills, and next steps, a structure that turns overwhelm into real momentum, and a bonus section to root your work into ocean connection. You don't have to wait for a degree, a perfect plan, or permission. Whether you're wading in or ready to take the deep dive, these tools are here to help you move from dreaming to doing. The ocean called. Are you ready to answer? Links in the show notes and on my website, karagracemuzia.com. I can't wait to see the waves you'll make. So you were already there to conduct surveys of the coral reef and kind of come up
yeah,
with your own assessments when this happened.
yeah. And it was interesting, and I think this kind of is relevant to how we think about climate change and changing worlds today. We had by then come up with a preliminary design for what a reserve might look like, where would be
Mm-hmm.
good fisheries areas, where would be good, high use areas, where would be good areas to protect. And one of the areas we protected was the area that got covered in ash.
Mm.
And, so in essence, we got an opportunity to test our own ideas, albeit quite dramatically. But I will be honest, the design we had come up with would not have been good for a volcanic eruption. Now, we don't normally think about designing for volcanic eruptions, but it really, as we came into dealing with climate change and changes in sea level, it really had in the back of my mind this idea of future planning for these rare events that could actually be the drivers of our ability for reefs to survive, or the ability of systems to survive. So it was I learned a lot in that experience.
Absolutely.
It's you know not to mention, like, don't dive under an active volcano. It is not a good idea.
Have you been back to dive there?
Yes, I have. Yes, yeah, I have been back there. Yeah. Very careful. We always were careful, but we really checked the volcanic schedule. How active was it, and you know, like, were we safe and all of that. So yeah, so that was the first one,
Yes.
and the second one was actually a plane crash, and again, it oddly enough, it is related to the ocean. I was over in Indonesia at the Coral Reef Conference, giving a paper, and we had taken a bit of time afterwards to go and dive and snorkel on these reefs. Which, I mean, the Indonesian reefs. Indonesia is kind of the cradle of biodiversity for coral reefs, so it's where you find the most diversity and in the most color, the most number of fish. It's very beautiful. And we were on this particular reef, and I remember just going down. We were actually doing a drift snorkel, and this huge sea turtle came up beside me, and we snorkeled along together. It was we made eye contact, and it was just one of those beautiful moments where you're swimming over this extraordinary reef, and there's a turtle swimming next to you, nearly as big as myself. And then, at one point, it turned right and went off out to the ocean, and I continued back to the boat. But the following day, we were flying back to the States, and there was a hurricane, a typhoon in the area, and we landed to refuel in Taiwan for the last leg, Taiwan to LA. And the hurricane had hit Taiwan at that point, and the plane was leaving close to midnight, and it was shaking on the ground. I mean, it was so windy, and so the storm was so strong. But the plane took off. It made the wrong turn. It didn't turn on the right runway, turned on the wrong runway, and started to take off and barrel down. And it ended up, actually, at the end of that runway was a construction zone. So the plane tried to take off and hit the construction zone on the way up, and that pierced the fuel tank, and the whole plane blew up. So we were, I don't know, maybe 100 feet off the ground, and everything just exploded. And I was extremely fortunate to survive it. I had actually changed my seat as I was getting on the plane, because I wanted to go further back to be able to sleep, and they gave me a seat right at the back. Had I not done that, I would not be here. It's one of those chance events of life, because the people I had been seated with did not make it. Prior to that, I think for me that event really brought home how important nature is to us. Because I was, in Taiwan, we're in the middle of a hurricane, communications are down. Nobody knows what's going on. My family didn't know where I was. And I remember being in the hotel and trying to deal with all the stress of what was happening, just trying to figure things out. And I couldn't sleep, I couldn't rest. And I filled up the bathtub in this hotel room. And I got in there and I put my head under water. And I literally took myself back to that reef that I described to you, where I had been snorkeling with a turtle. And I just felt so relaxed. I felt so calm. And after that, when I came home, I would go to the ocean and I would start to, just to really make sense of it, to come back from it, and just to if you like, commune with nature and use nature to bring resilience back into my life. Because, nature, as discovered, deals with volcanoes, hurricanes, and everything else. And just to have that time with nature to really be able to process things. And I think this was a very important part of me realizing that nature is our ally, both as individuals in what nature provides us in solace and beauty and extraordinary things to see, but also in protecting us from sea level rise, storm surges, landslides. Nature provides all of these incredible services to us. And that in part started me on my trajectory to start looking at how do we better engage with nature? How do we better leverage nature services? How do we work more harmoniously with nature to create communities, to create businesses that are in alignment with nature and make us more resilient? So that was really the start of that journey. And I think that will resonate with people now during the pandemic because, the one thing that, we're almost a year into it, but it was very clear and still is that very early on, people in lockdown, we started noticing more birds. We started noticing more animals. We
Hmm.
started going out in nature more and just feeling good from going for a walk or feeling good, even if it's in your back garden. And I think we have to hold on to that feeling that we got and that lesson we've just learned and take it forward.
Yes, absolutely. Working with the resiliency of nature because nature really, really is the ultimate. I mean, it's been around for eons. It's been through everything and it keeps coming back in its own forms. So learning to work with it.
Yeah.
I love that. And is that what inspired you to create your own firm?
Yes, it is. Because I've been working both in academia and nonprofit world for a long time, and I still am engaged in academic
Hmm.
work. But I started to think about how do we how do we reach out to people who don't
Hmm.
think like us, as in someone who may be driven by different reasons. Maybe they want to do big developments. Maybe they want to
Hmm.
make a lot of money. Um, how do we engage people who have different set of priorities and start to work with them so that they can see that regardless of their priorities, there is a role for nature and nature can fit in with that.
Hmm.
So we've been doing now a lot of work with, investors being one, and I would say, fairly select developers who are interested in this field and getting more interested. I'll give you a couple of examples because I think that's better than just me saying abstractly. We were working with somebody out in St. Barth, actually, the owner who had bought this huge property and effectively bought a beach, an entire beach with his property front. And he was originally thinking about doing a seawall because a lot of the dune had been eroding, had been overused, and to protect his property, protect his privacy. And so he came to us and he said, "Look, we want to do a seawall, but apparently nobody likes that idea." We're like, "Well, I'm sure they don't," because it's. And so we talked with him and said, "Look, we think you have better options here." And I said, "Look, I think if we can restore this sand dune that you have, vegetated,
Hmm.
that dune will not only protect your beach, but it will help to grow the beach. So you will have a wider beach, but the beach will come and go with wave action as beaches do. But ultimately, you will maintain your beach and you'll have your privacy, and it'll be it's a living solution." He said, "That sounds good to me. Why don't we go and do it?" So we got the permission to do it, and then took about 18 months, and we worked with his kind of local manager, a man called Jim Booz, who really got into this whole idea of using dunes and nature-based solutions. And within a year and a half, we had a fully restored dune that looked like it had been there for about 25 years,
Mm.
and to a height of about 12 feet, 4 meters. That dune withstood every hurricane that hit it, including Hurricane Irma in 2017, which hit it at Category 5 plus. The dune took a beating from these horrendous winds and storm surge, but it literally held the line.
Mhm.
And so when the insurance adjuster came down to look at it, he said, "Look, I'm going to be honest with you. If you had not rebuilt that dune, your entire property and your home would have floated out to sea by now." We were really, we were like, "That's it." That's that. But coming back to the other side of it, it's this one project alone saved him $750,000 in construction.
Mhm.
He had no maintenance because effectively, nature keeps growing,
Mhm.
and he and heaven knows, how much it saved him in the loss of his home. Let's add another several million to that. So there is both a financial case to make for protecting nature, as well as a biodiversity case, as well as the beauty
Mhm.
situation. And we're doing this now. We have two other projects that we're involved with. One is actually where a developer has agreed that, we said, "Look, if you want to build, you've got to be back a certain amount from the ocean to deal with sea level rise." But the dunes in this area had been sand mined, and we said, "You've got to restore them to at least about 12 feet." So we're building 7 miles of dune to protect this area and protect the community against sea level rise. And we just had our first. last week, you know. So
I was going to ask, what does that look like? How do you build that much dune? It seems like a huge task.
it is. It's industrial strength. Um, so in essence, to do that, you know, for the first project, we were able to use even just wheelbarrows, you know, with workers setting the hole up from the beach. But if you're doing 7 miles of dune, you've got to be using excavators. You're moving a lot of sand around. So this is the sand is there. It's repurposing and repositioning the sand to to reform this dune that used to exist before, this ring like dune, and that's heavy duty equipment. I mean, this is you know, it really involves, if you like, almost construction workers. It involves people who are, you know, I guess really construction. Yeah,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you're using excavators and other heavy equipment, you need people that are licensed to do that. And that's typically people in the construction world.
yeah. And we're about to start another project, which is similar to that, which is coral reefs. So we're working with a man called John Paul DeJoria, who's a both philanthropist and environmentalist. And I was talking with him about the role of coral reefs in really the resilience that they break the waves' energy, and that a lot of them are in trouble, as you know, as they sink, as they collapse and sink, or as sea level rises. The waves that are coming in are coming in much stronger because the reef doesn't break them, and so the stronger the waves come in, the further in they go. So if we have a drop of anywhere like half a meter to a meter, which is what 1.5 to 1 foot of reef, you can get as much as you know 3,000 meters, which is what about 9,000 feet of run up extra than you would have, you know, which is way, you know, goes way into people's properties usually by then. What we're about to do here is to do a major call. We just put a team together to do a major to restore an acre of reef, building a reef using the structure that was there. You know, these a lot of tree branching, the ones I mentioned earlier, they form the main barrier reef. So we're going to construct a reef.
So elkhorn and staghorn corals, the acroporos.
Acropolis, yes, yeah, and then repopulate it with those species because they will take that structure and grow with it. But the thing that's different about this is that we're doing it on a large scale. And you got me thinking about it when you were asking about how you do it. And I said, you know, with excavators and construction workers, as we're thinking about restoring ecosystems and bringing it back, we need to be thinking at that scale. We need to be. We've learned a lot from doing the small scale experiments and projects, but the scale of the problem is huge. You know, we're losing, you know, at least half of our reefs are gone. At the rate we're going, there's another 90% at risk. If we don't come up with a solution that is, you know, technologically sound, but also large enough that we will address the problem at that level, you know, we could lose that fight. I think we need to do that, and that means that, you know, marine biologists of all sorts will be involved. You know, construction marine biologists, you know, people who like to manage marine projects. It really takes everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's a huge task and a huge undertaking when you think about the entirety of the ocean and not just an acre, which an acre is a huge undertaking in and of itself.
Yeah, it will. I mean, an acre is a huge thing to do, and it's, you know, it's a major job. But you look at it and you go, well, that's actually in the grand scheme of things, even when you put it on the map, it's not huge. But if we do that way and do it and do it with an ability that it's replicable, but also can be expanded, then we're on our way.
Absolutely. So what does that look like? Are you growing some of the fragments onshore and then outplanting them offshore, or are you collecting like fragments of opportunity out in the fields and outplanting them that
So
way?
this one is in the process of starting. That we've worked on smaller projects before, and the plan for this is to actually set up a nursery. We will find corals of opportunity that you talk about, and these are corals that they've often settled in an area where they're not going to survive, or the storm has gone through and that coral has been fragmented, and you've got loose pieces of corals. So you just opportunistically find them. So we will start with
Hmm.
those and kind of bring them into the nursery and grow them up a little more. And then we'll start to think about which ones survive and then how to fragment them. One of you probably know, as the oceans are getting warmer and more acidic, these corals are getting stressed. What we found in the Caribbean, I think they found elsewhere too, is that there have been several bleaching events. Like 2015 was a major bleaching event in the Caribbean, where corals get water temperature goes up, corals, if you like, overheat, and the
Hmm.
plants that live in the corals and give them their color, just either the coral expels them or they leave, and then usually, but not always, the coral dies. And what we found was that there were some corals that recovered, as in they got their plants back, but there were also ones that didn't bleach and that didn't die during this warming event. So if we can tap into whatever, whether it's genetic, which probably is, we can tap into that ability of these corals to withstand these conditions and use those corals to
Absolutely.
seed the next generation of reef, then we give those reefs a head start. And there's a lot of work going on around the world. There's a lot of scientists now working, particularly in labs, that are really researching, how to grow these corals, how to identify them, and actually how to create them. So there's a lot of exciting work going on around the world.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, there is a lot of research, particularly with corals, and there's a lot of genetic research being done with corals to see how corals are surviving, because there are some, thankfully, that are able to survive this massive stressor event that is the ocean rising and heating up and becoming a little bit more acidic as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, it's phenomenal, and
Hmm.
the work that's coming out of these labs is just great and so useful. I don't know about you, but I look at this last year and I see what scientists have been able to do in creating viable vaccines to this pandemic that's really disrupted all of our lives. And you think, if we can do that in a year, what couldn't we do for oceans and corals? When we put our mind to it, it's we just have to come together and do it.
Yes, I agree. You had a quote in, I think it was one of your Huffington Post articles. It's nature is not a nice to have, it's a need to have. And I think your work really highlights that. It's without the resiliency of nature, then we wouldn't have what we have. If your property owner had built a seawall and in the face of Irma, it would have been overcome by waves and storm surge and wind, whereas the natural dune was able to withstand the beating and hold strong.
Yes, yeah, and like you say, we see it in along the east coast and south coast of the U.S. too. You're in Florida, and these marshes, the value of marshes in particular, and again offshore reefs, but these coastal marshes and mangroves they really make the difference.
Absolutely. So you had an article, and I think that's a really nice way to kind of bring it into the everyday life, how to align with nature. And you had three principles behind it. What is it? What do you have? What do you have locally? Is it healthy? And what can you do to take action? Do you have like a project or a particular area that comes to mind when you think of these principles that you could kind of share a little bit more about?
I think I can talk to you from our projects or just even more generally, but I think these apply to everybody and wherever you are, whether you're in a city, whether you are somewhere like Colorado, where you're in the mountains, and the forests have a huge role to play in protecting you
Hmm.
from basically often landslides, to be honest, or landslides, and they also play a large role in flood protection. Um, so, like for us in our projects and the ones we're doing, and a lot of the work we're doing right now is in reefs and mangroves and coastal marshes. We've gone out and we've looked at these as to, literally, first question is, what do they do? What services do they provide? Well, they provide protection against storms. They provide fisheries. They reduce water pollution. Mangroves and marshes will do a lot with that. They reduce flooding. And then if you look at what are these systems capable of, and then go and look in your own area and say, well, do I have healthy marshes, or are these marshes filled with trash? Are they filled up with sediments? Are they filled with
Mm-hmm.
invasive species? And if they are, we know that they're not providing that level of services. Coral reefs, are the coral reefs damaged, broken, or people, hitting them with anchors, or even worse, are they blowing holes in them so they can create these passages for boats? You know, if that's the case, you don't have a healthy system. And then it comes back to, well, what can I do about it? You know, as somebody who cares about it, somebody who's a citizen of that community, what action can I take? And that can be anything from,
Mm-hmm.
being a scientist to literally engaging with your wider community, working with the wider community to find solutions and implement them. Or it can be talking to your local politicians and saying, look, we've got this issue, we need to take this action. Or maybe even becoming a local politician. That's not a bad idea either. So you become decision makers. Or just getting involved. It's extraordinary that what people can do once they pay attention and get involved. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that holds true, particularly for scientists to get involved in their communities.
Absolutely. Another term that you came up with, or I don't know if you came up with it, but first time I heard it was when you're writing, is a nouveau environmentalism, and you really kind of highlight this with a lot of your work is getting stakeholders together through a commonality of cause. So you're trying to look for common ground that unites rather than divides people. So for stakeholders for coral reefs, for example, you have the fishermen they want to fish the reef, but then you have divers that want to be able to enjoy the reef without the threat of fishermen or fishing hooks all over the reef. And then you have the property owners that benefit from the reef being there and whole and intact. So it's really interesting the commonality of cause. How do you start that conversation, getting these stakeholders together? Because a lot of times people are just so set in their ways and they're so entrenched in their own mentality of how things should be with that resource that they're not always willing to listen to the other side.
I I think that's well said. I mean, I think that's exactly the challenge you face. The first is that they are very entrenched and they have a view as to how it should be. But the other thing they have is a fear of the other side. I worked in the California redwoods of California a number of years ago, and it was clear to me that the people working in these coastal forests had worked there for
Mm-hmm.
generations, and they were afraid that the environmentalists were going to destroy their way of life, um, and that the environmental groups were afraid that these,
Mm-hmm.
loggers would continue going until there was nothing left of the ecosystem. And neither actually was headed in the direction the other thought they were headed in. So I think two things. First is that people want to be heard. They want people to understand their point of view, where they're coming from. And in that conversation, you hear what's important, and you also hear what's their greatest fear: loss of livelihood, loss of community, and probably you listen and you think, loss of community, that's really important. And it would be important to me. And from the environmental perspective, it's the same thing. The value of environmentalism, the value of protecting our natural world, the value of the beauty of it, our dependence on it, just this extraordinary nature that we've been given. That is a very strong value, and it will often do people in the community who exploit the resource. So step one is to listen, and step two then is to make people know that they've been heard. If they've been heard, then they feel like they've got a viewpoint. And then the third is to listen to what in these conversations that you
Mm-hmm.
start, what is it that people have said that resonates with each other? And if you get
Mm-hmm.
everybody in the same room and you can have a conversation about it, people very quickly figure out where they share commonality with somebody on the other side of the table that perhaps they didn't even know they did. It's getting people together in a framework of respect and being able to listen, even if I've been in those situations where people have talked about how their values and how they want to use nature, and it's not something that I would necessarily believe in or want, but yet sometimes you can do really great things with people who have different set of priorities.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really good point. Hearing the other side and not just to hear their concerns, but to also recognize that each side is a person, and everybody has their own fears and concerns, and to be able to hear them out and recognize and see the humanity in that can help go a long way in bridging gaps and working together.
Yeah, well said, Tara, absolutely. And I think there's a value too in that we all learn in that process. You know, I may feel that I'm an expert on certain things of the ocean, but if you're speaking with people who use the resource differently, you find that they have
Mm-hmm.
a way of seeing, a way of learning, and a certain level of knowledge that perhaps you hadn't thought about. And everybody going in there with a certain open mind, everybody learns, which is really exciting.
Truly is. So that segues fairly nicely into, I always like to leave the audience with a conservation ask, something for them to go out and do and bring into the world from each episode. What is your conservation ask?
Oh, my conservation ask to your audience would be to become a citizen scientist. Um, we need people engaged with science. We need people out there gathering information that will help us better conserve and better manage our planet and our natural resources. And I feel this is really important right now because in the last year, there's been such a disconnect and a polarization between science and community that's arisen, and that we need to heal that. And fundamentally, we're all scientists at the end of the day. We all make decisions based on knowledge and data and observation. Everybody is a scientist. You're born a scientist. We just have to remember that. So my ask would be to get engaged with citizen science programs, no matter what aspect of the ocean you care about. So, for instance, if you're a scuba diver or a snorkeler,
Mm-hmm.
Project Aware, which is an international conservation group, have a great program called Dive Against Debris, and it's where you dive and you take debris out of the ocean, but you also record the debris. And now I think they've published two or three scientific papers on where debris is located, what kind of debris, and how better to manage it. So, and this is all collected by, I think there's
Mm-hmm.
something like 11 million data points collected entirely by citizen divers. There's another organization called SciStarter, which is completely devoted to citizen science programs. You can do everything from the oceans to outer space. But for oceans, it's a great place to look at what projects are there, what projects you can engage in. It was started by a woman called Darlene Cavalier, who's done an amazing job. And there's so much that you can engage in on that, on the work that they've been doing. And like I said, the value of this too is that it's all over the world. So if you're in the US listening to this, or you're in Australia listening to this, you can find out what projects are there and connect with them. But even in more generally, I'm sure everybody in their community knows people who are engaged in science programs or citizen science programs or conservation organizations that are starting to do more of these. Surfrider Foundation, was one of the big organizations that really stopped marine pollution on the West Coast by giving their surfers little bottles to collect
Mm-hmm.
water samples. How simple is that, and how profound that it had a huge impact on stopping ocean pollution. So, citizen scientists, get engaged.
Get engaged, get involved. I love it.
Yeah, please. Yeah, we need you. We need you, and the work you'll do is so rewarding, and it'll make a huge difference.
Wonderful. And one of my very, very favorite questions to ask is, what is your favorite field story or stories to tell? And this could just be a day out in the field and it was magical and all the things went right, or it could be a day where all the things went wrong and it makes a really great story now.
Oh, well, I think I've had a couple of field experiences that have gone badly wrong. So, like being blown up is not a good one. Um, wow, I think I've had so many extraordinary experiences in the field. I think a day in the field, some of the best days in the field for me are when I've gone out with my colleagues and students, and we've literally gone out in the morning and spent the entire day looking at nature, being underwater, just sitting around having lunch together at the end of the day, sharing a glass of wine, waiting for the green flash if it's evening,
Mm-hmm.
and just that sense of community that we build is amazing. And I'm going to stop a second because I'm trying to think. You probably want a particular story, right? So I will give you, I was thinking, a field story. Field story is when we went out to look at these reefs, coral reefs, and I had a boat that I'd rented. And so there was me and there was a woman working for me and a student, and I was in charge of the boat. And we went up to look at these reefs, and it was extraordinary. And we loved it so much that I said, "Oh, let's go look at some other reefs and some other reefs." And we did, and we spent so much time out there that I didn't notice, and we ran out of gas. We were in the middle, well, we were offshore in the middle and we had no gas, and we weren't really prepared. And then this fishing boat went by, so we were jumping up and down, like trying to get noticed by this guy. And it was a guy and his son, and they came around and they saw us, and they just literally threw a rope at us. They didn't stop, and the three of us caught this rope, and they towed us back in with the three of us holding onto this rope, so none of us would be like overboard. It was the scariest thing we did, and I think it was our first day in this new site, so we became very famous for our I guess our lack of marine and boating power. Man, yep. So that was one.
That's a fun story. Running out of gas is always a problem, but particularly so when you're out in the middle of the ocean.
Well, I just realized that I've done that 3 times.
So if you ever go on the boat with Dr. Brosnan, make sure you bring gas with you.
Check the gas tank, yeah. And make sure she doesn't get carried away by going, "Oh, just one more sight. Oh, just one more look,"
Oh, that's so funny. You mentioned earlier the green flash. Could you explain a little bit more about the phenomenon that happens at sunset?
Yeah, it happens. I've only seen it in the tropics, but it is as the sun goes over the horizon, literally just as it disappears behind the horizon on a very clear sky, you see this sudden green flash. And I don't know that I can fully explain the phenomenon. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure anybody can, but it's real. For a long time, scientists doubted it existed, and people did. And then there were some pictures and some studies done to explain. It has to do with light scattering, obviously, but it's a neon green flash that appears in the sky just over the sun. So after a hard day in the field, we would all get a beer and sit on the wall or sit on whatever and watch the sun go down. And if it was a green flash night, just wait for the green flash.
It's amazing. I haven't seen it. I've looked many times, but I'm not on the west coast of Florida, so I have to travel to go see that.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, Carl, you just have to come down and visit us on our field sites and come and see what we're doing and engage with us. And then we will take you out for a glass of wine or a beer at the end of the evening, and we'll make sure you see a green flash.
Perfect. I'm in. Well, thank you for taking the time to be on the show today. I really enjoyed our chat.
Thank you, Cara. I really did too. And like I said, thank you so much for bringing marine biology into the lives of so many people. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, do you want to help the oceans? Have you considered a career in marine biology, but maybe just aren't sure where to start? Head on over to my website, marinebio.life, and subscribe to my newsletter. When you subscribe, you'll receive a free PDF download where you'll learn the 7 steps to becoming a marine biologist without the degree. Thank you for listening to today's show. I'd love to hear any insight you've gleaned. Leave a comment in the show notes or send me an email over at marinebio.life. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a review and of course, share with your friends. If you want more resources for ocean news, including conservation topics and careers, plus personal insight from me that I just don't share anywhere else, join me at marinebio.life and sign up for email updates. Keep after your dreams and making waves in your community. One person can make a difference. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time on the So You Want to Be a Marine Biologist podcast.